Sathiya, what's up, man? Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ryan. Thanks so much.
This is the first time we've connected, but we have a mutual friend, Nicholas, who introduced us. And I'm glad he did because some of the topics that you cover, specifically as it relates to pornography and overcoming that addiction, is something that so many men are struggling with. And so many men really have the desire to put the porn down.
Yeah. Uh, it's insane. It's just insane how much of a problem it is. And I think a lot of people like me, I mean, I was addicted for 15 years and we can get into all of that if you want, but a lot of people are just lost, like no idea how to actually get this out of their life if they wanted to. And so, yeah, so it's a big mission, but I'm grateful for people like you that are willing to go here and talk about it a little bit.
Well, it's not a comfortable conversation, and
No.
so many guys know that they are addicted, that it's a problem. They know some of the negative consequences and results from that, and yet we still don't want to talk about it because there's a lot of shame and guilt
Oh,
around it,
yeah.
so we don't ever address it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like when I was struggling, I was a pastor's kid. I grew up Christian. For those of you watching the video, you can tell I have an Indian background. And so layers of shame of just like all the reasons to never talk about sex, never talk about anything kind of related to this sort of stuff. And so I get it, for the people that are listening, I've been there. I was there a long time, just wrapped in the shame and seemingly no way out.
So, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 32.
Okay, so a few years younger than me. You're about 10 years younger than me. How did you get introduced first to pornography? Because for me, I remember the first time I think that I can remember anyways, that I saw pornography. And this isn't pornography, but I remember moving down that path was like the Sears, lingerie
Yeah.
catalog that my mom would
100%.
get or something. And then
Yeah.
I think at some point one of my buddies maybe had like a Pamela Anderson Playboy or something like that I saw, and then of course with digital and internet and technology, it just has become rampant outside of just the magazines that we used to have to steal from the gas station.
Yeah, yeah. How old were you when you saw that Sears magazine?
I was when I oh that I was I don't know, probably 12, 13, 14 years old. I think I probably saw that Playboy when I was probably about the same time, I would say 13, 14
Yeah.
years old, somewhere right in there.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I was 11 years old, and it happened for me in the computer lab of my Christian school, if you can believe that. My
Wow.
buddy
Okay.
was like, he just came over. He was like, "Hey, one of my teammates, he played like high-level soccer, and he was like, one of my teammates told me to check out this website. I won't say what it is. It's still a pornographic website, unfortunately, but very innocent sounding. You would never know in a million years."
Mm.
And typed it in. I didn't even understand what I was looking at, but I was in a public place, obviously the computer lab, and it was back in the day when the computer monitors had that big like circular power button, and I
Right.
remember just trying to bash that thing in as quickly as I could before anybody saw what I was looking at. Like it was a really weird experience. I was kind of confused, but obviously like just pre-puberty, so enough intrigue that by the time I did hit puberty, I remembered the site, and that was kind of my gateway into a much longer struggle with it. The interesting thing, though, just like to relay this back to your story, the average age of first exposure hasn't really changed. Maybe it's a tad younger, but most studies show it's like 9 to 13 years old. The difference is the barrier to entry. Because, like, for
Mm.
you to get that magazine, right, and then to go back to it, like, it would have taken work, effort, a bit of planning. I used to have to plan, like, even when I was 12, 13 years old and I started watching more regularly, like, I was watching on the computer, the one computer in the entire house, right? So there was like a little bit more cost to basically get there. And now, as you're saying, like it's so accessible, doesn't cost people any money, and you can stay anonymous while you're watching it. Those three A's, the affordability, accessibility, and anonymity, those three A's make it rampant, like you're saying, and they're really messing up people's brains when they start to enter adulthood.
What is, I mean, it's clear why. Okay, well, let me back up a little bit because here's one
Sure.
of the issues I have. Not issues, but the questions is a lot of the times, and you've even written about what is the root problem of pornography addiction. And
Yeah.
if I'm just from the outside looking in, and also, obviously viewing pornography myself, sometimes I don't know if there's a root problem necessarily, other than there's these hot women that guys want to see naked. Like that to me is enough, right? So is there
Yeah.
always a root problem that is causing these issues for guys, or is it just we're horny?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think generally there is something more at a root level going on if you can't get away from it. I think that's
Mm.
always the telltale sign is when you can't abstain or when you start to engage in riskier behavior to get your hit, when you start to decline regular commitments in your life so that you can watch if you lose a job over it, like when things start to get a little bit more serious or it's affecting performance in the bedroom, those are the telltale signs that this is no longer just like something you do because you're a guy and you have a sex drive. There's some deeper roots here that are at play.
That's interesting. So you said some symptoms would be declining invitations you would normally say yes to,
Yep.
uh, job performance, potentially even losing a job because you viewed something on a computer you shouldn't have,
Yep.
uh, performance issues in the bedroom. Is there anything else that might be a symptom that guys should be aware of that it's becoming a problem?
Yeah, maybe the biggest one is actually desensitization. So that's
Mm,
when you either need to watch more frequently, for longer periods of time, or more intense content to get the same hit. That's a
that
sign that things are going the wrong direction.
that's a good point because it becomes increasingly perverse or even violent for
Yes.
guys to get the same dopamine release. I imagine is what it is the dopamine release that comes from either climax or just viewing it in general.
100%. And that's why you hear stories about like a Ted Bundy, or someone was telling me the other day, I don't have this verified, but they said they surveyed a bunch of people in a jail, and a lot of them when you start talking to them about when they really start to act out, most of it pointed back to pornography. And sometimes it's because of the stuff that's being depicted in the more extreme content. And then eventually when you get desensitized, it doesn't do it for you. So then they start to engage physically with other people instead of just watching on a screen. Obviously, those are extreme scenarios, but it illustrates the principle.
Is there any sort of research or data that suggests or shows a correlation between a young man, a boy, being exposed to or addicted to pornography and the lack or presence of a father figure in the home?
That's a really good question. I don't know of any data along those lines. I imagine it'd be pretty interesting, not necessarily for exposure, because exposure is inevitable no matter how good your upbringing is. I'm the classic example of that: two loving parents, pastor's home, Christian school. But the long-term effects and people's recovery, there would definitely be a link there. Again, I don't want to speculate because I don't know of any specific studies that have actually hit on that.
Yeah, I wonder what that correlation would be, or even if there was, and I don't know if there is, but how that would, if it comes in the form of discipline, if a dad were to catch, for example,
Hmm.
his son watching inappropriate material, if that would stomp it out, before it became a problem. I don't know. I'm just trying to think about all of these issues because I know the rise of fatherless homes is a huge thing that we're dealing with currently and going to need to deal with even more.
Yeah, it's a bit of a silent epidemic. This is actually a great segue into the conversation about roots because typically, like one of the greatest reasons that people struggle with an addiction is number one, unmet needs, and number two, a lack of resilience. And I think you can make an argument for both in the arena of what fathers provide, because fathers certainly are very, very important for helping us learn to get our needs met as we grow up, and really helping us get our needs met when we're really young. But the resilience part is a huge deal. And if you don't have a father figure in the home modeling the resiliency, it's not just that you get exposed and you get hooked. I think it's that people don't have that example. They don't have the character development or the fortitude within to actually make a recovery. And I think that would be an interesting angle for the role that fathers do play in all of this, because fathers do impart resiliency and character building and some of those deeper inner qualities that really help somebody survive an addiction and really make it to the other side.
So I definitely want to get into the resilience side, but let's talk about those unmet needs. You're not just talking about a guy's need to procreate. You're talking about more, maybe deeper level needs. I don't know if there's anything more deeper than our need to reproduce, but what other types of needs are you referring to?
Okay, so there's four core needs. The first is just the basics, so food, shelter, water. The
Sure.
second is safety, and that's true on a physical, biological level, no threats in the environment. It's true also on a psychological level, free to express yourself. The third is intimacy, and the fourth is significance.
Mm.
So the general theory is that if those needs don't get met, um, because they are core needs, they're not just optional, they're fundamental. You will get them met one way or another. The question is whether or not it'll be healthy. And so if it doesn't happen in the home or the more natural avenues, then for something like intimacy, we say intimacy is the need of all needs. And intimacy is a great example, and it's often what drives a lot of people's draw to pornography and other sexual misbehavior. They don't get that experience of intimacy, and then they find other ways to get it met. And like we said before, because of the accessibility of internet porn, it becomes a very viable option.
I think the intimacy is a no-brainer. I mean, not that we can't dig into it, but it seems like, yeah, clearly that would lead to a sexual outlet of us trying to meet those needs. But how does safety and significance come into play? And how is somebody attempting to meet those types of needs with pornography?
So, okay, a man's strength is always measured by his ability to confront pain. And the reason safety factors into this is because if you don't know how to cope with a lack of safety, or you don't know how to actually stay secure in an environment, you will always find a coping mechanism, something. Some people it's humor, like just at a very like kind of playful kind of level, right? But we always find ways to cope. And so when people don't feel safe, they always find ways to kind of bring themselves back to that place of safety. At a neurological level, porn is either a relaxant or a stimulant. This is maybe a better way to phrase it, Ryan, is if you're using porn as a relaxant, it's to take the edge off. And when we say we want to take the edge off, what we're really saying is we're trying to restore back to a place of safety where whatever is the perceived threat is gone. And same with the stimulant. When we're depressed, when we're numb, that kind of thing, porn operates as this thing that allows us to find our homeostasis, our place of safety. So that's what that element is. In our, we have kind of three pillars of recovery, and our third pillar is identity formation. And that's where the significance part comes into play. I think a lot of guys actually stay stuck in porn and can't get themselves out because they have no sense of significance, no sense of purpose, no sense that they were actually put on this planet for something greater than just paying bills and eating food. And so when that need isn't satiated, then we either numb out to cope, or we just find terrible ways to find a calling and fulfillment in things that aren't fulfilling, like sex, like porn, like money, like career status, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm. I was thinking as you were saying that, and I don't know if this is way off. This is just a theory with the significance. Clearly we find significance in being sexually desirable,
Yeah.
right? So if plenty of attractive women are attracted to us, then we feel good about that, and we should,
Yeah.
to a degree, feel good about that.
Oh,
I'm
definitely.
wondering if when men watch pornography, if they see themselves in a way as performing those acts with these women and somehow misguiding, like, are misguided into believing that those women are attracted to him. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but if they're living vicariously through somebody else and think that they're more sexually attractive than they actually are.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. I use different language, but it's the same concept. Porn is the easiest way to experience acceptance from another woman.
Mm,
There's no risk of rejection when you watch porn,
right.
right? And so I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's easy attention, and the reason we watch most videos, like the reason people love even a podcast, is we tend to insert ourselves into the interview. We imagine that we're answering the questions or somehow participating in the story. And the same thing is true in pornography. So, absolutely 100%. And rejection issues is something that a lot of our clients are working through for whatever the reason might be. But yeah, it's very common that guys find themselves watching this stuff because it's just an easy way to get the acceptance without any risk or any cost to them.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I actually imagine that's going to get worse and worse because you have virtual reality.
Yes.
Sex robots is probably an issue that is not even probably, it is an issue that's going to become increasingly dangerous.
Yeah.
So I imagine this problem is going to get even worse.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's just the barriers to entry become lower and lower, as does the level of stimulation. And that's the real problem with, like, as far as messing with people's brains, development, the way we connect to other people. It's the reprogramming of our brains that this kind of technology is going to create all kinds of havoc for.
So an interesting thought is, there's there's men who are not in committed monogamous relationships, whether that's by design or by default. They're not in those types of relationships, and maybe they don't want to go sleep around with a bunch of women, and so they feel like in order to avoid doing that, they can meet their sexual needs through pornography and masturbation as a healthy outlet relative to that sexual promiscuity. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of choosing the lesser of two evils. So it just depends on how good of a life you want. If I really love somebody, I would never let them settle for the lesser of two evils. To me, the person who's really like living a fulfilling, healthy life is just in control of their sexual needs or desires. It's not something that they fall victim to. Like this thing just has to get met, and so I'm either sleeping around or I'm watching porn. That's the talk of a very powerless person.
Mm.
Somebody who is really powerful and living in control of their life is fully aware of their needs and is asking themselves, what is the superior way or the best way for me to get this need met? So that would be my response to somebody who's in that situation.
So what are your thoughts then about, so obviously it sounds like you're saying zero pornography at all. What about masturbation?
Yeah, that is always the $1 million question. So I mean, I come from a faith perspective. That's sort of my background. And so there's an element of conviction that I have that would say masturbation is wrong. But let's put that aside and just talk about the biology of it and the principle of it. On a biological level, generally people that are masturbating with any kind of regularity typically are doing it to clear their mind, to relief, maybe stress or whatever it might be. And like sometimes it's just pent up sexual urges. Usually, the side effects of masturbating regularly are more negative than they are positive.
Mm.
But we never know that in the moment. In the moment, it always feels like the best option we have. On a deeper psychological level, masturbation is solo intimacy. And I think the design of sex, what like you actually said earlier, is procreation. Like that's the biological function of it. So to me, masturbation even violates the biological element. And I've heard of people talking about masturbate to kind of get in touch with their body, and there's no fantasy and there's nothing like that. I still think it's a weird way to experience a sexual release when we know the superior way will always be with another person. So I don't know if I could say masturbation is wrong, and that you should never do it. What I could say with 100% confidence though is masturbation is not best practice.
Hmm. I've heard, I think it's Jordan Peterson, if I remember correctly, he's been talking more recently about some of these issues, and he had said in a clip or an interview that I watched that we're having men and women who are not getting married as early, or they're
Yep.
not getting married at all. And what pornography and masturbation does is it satisfies to some degree, to the degree that it can, your urge to go out and find a woman and put forth the effort to win her love and then mate with her. And so
Yeah.
that's why we're seeing declining divorce rates, which presents a whole other set of problems in not just divorce rates. Excuse me, I said divorce rates, but an increase in divorce rates, a decline in marriage altogether, uh,
Yes.
and it creates a problem, a societal problem above and beyond just pornography addiction.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. Like where does this thing end, right? Like if we start to become more comfortable with just getting our fill on a screen, like you said, not getting married, not procreating, like you can kind of see the long-term effects that's going to have on a society. I'm really grateful people like Jordan Peterson are speaking up about it. I've seen a bunch of his clips too, and I think a lot of it is hitting on this fact that ultimately porn is a detraction away from the fundamental design of us to connect, to relate, and from a male perspective I would say especially to procreate. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
What are your thoughts? Have you looked into this concept of semen retention? I mean, I hear about it. I to me it sounds dumb. And admittedly, I haven't really dived into it. I haven't done a lot of research on it, but I mean, there's a reason why we produce semen. There's a reason why we as men ejaculate, and
Yeah.
in the right context, it's important. But to deny that at an extreme level seems absurd to me.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the semen retention movements myself. There's other coaches in my space where you do their program and they call themselves PMO coaches. So that means porn, masturbation, and orgasm. And so if you're married in that situation or you're in an active sexual relationship, what they'll say is for the 90 days or 120 days you do their program, you do none of that. There's literally no orgasm, and it's to reset your brain. You had Terry Crews on here talk about this last year, actually, Ryan,
Yeah.
and he talked a little bit about how he went the 90 days. So I'm not against that approach. That would be kind of the semen retention approach in a recovery context. But like we were saying earlier, if the actual issue here is, let's call it intimacy, okay? We say intimacy is the need of all needs, and porn addiction is typically an intimacy disorder. So if that's actually the problem here, how are you doing yourself any favors by not connecting intimately with your significant other, your spouse, your partner for those 90 days? What we want to do is we actually want people to fall in love with getting their orgasm that way, the more natural way, as opposed to something fake and produced like pornography. So to me, semen retention is, I'm not going to totally crap on it. If people want to do it, that's fine. But as far as my philosophy goes, I just don't have any room for that kind of approach because we're much more about the relational connection kind of component.
So as you talk about it, I understand. I can understand the discipline portion of that 90 days or 100, whatever it is, 120 days. I can understand even the mental reset. Hey, I don't need, because I think there's an issue in needing sex from a woman. That's a problem too. Like I
Big
need
time.
to have this for validation. That's a problem. Where I get tripped up is I don't want to lose my power by giving away my seed, and and women don't deserve all my power. This kind of stuff is where I really begin to take issue with in that sort of movement.
It's just hard to imagine anybody having a really healthy, fulfilling, long-term relationship with another person when that's their thinking, right? Because there's no altruism to it. It's totally self-focused. It's the personal gain. I don't even know if it's really true, to be honest. Like even just the logic of it doesn't really make sense. And there is some research that shows like maybe you get a bit of a spike in your energy and that kind of thing, but nothing long term or cohort to really show that. As far as I know, I granted I don't research it a ton because like I said, it's not part of my philosophy. But yeah, I have a hard time seeing the real long term benefit of it.
I actually wonder about testosterone levels in specifically whether it's there. I wonder if there's some sort of not formula necessarily, but schedule where, because they've talked about where your testosterone will increase if you're on this kind of semen retention program, uh,
Hmm.
but also having sex with a woman also boosts and increase testosterone. So it to me it just doesn't pass the common sense test. To me is really what it comes down to, like the biological common. We have that function for a reason. We ought to use it in healthy ways.
Yeah, I would agree. Think of it like, okay, let's say you're addicted to chocolate. So your thing is like, well, I'm gonna remove all the chocolate out of my house. I'm not gonna eat chocolate for 90 days. And that's definitely doable. It's a great feat of your self-control and your discipline. What are you gonna do after those 90 days? Like you have had no experience actually just having a healthy relationship with chocolate where maybe you eat it once a week or twice a week or something like that. Which is why typically people that go on these challenges or they try to just hit a certain streak, we don't do any streak counting in our groups, and there's a reason for that. And it's typically because people get so obsessed with the number, there's no inner development. They don't change their relationship to, in our case, pornography, but in the example, chocolate. And then when the time's up, the 90 days, 120 days, people just revert back to their old habits. So we want to change their relationship to the substance, to the behavior, so that long term they can actually experience regular, steady control over it.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Let's go back to, we were talking about masturbation earlier. You said that there's some negative side effects that outweigh the positive benefits of engaging in that. I imagine erectile dysfunction is one, but I'm not really familiar with what other side effects there may be that comes from that act.
Yeah, so typically people talk about brain fog being a big one, especially if you do it chronically, any kind of regular basis. Not everybody reports that. Some people maybe don't get that. Those two would be the big ones. The erectile dysfunction you mentioned is significant. And then the other thing we didn't really talk about is most people attach masturbation to fantasy. And that becomes a huge problem in the arena of objectifying women, how you perceive other people. really like sexualizing people and humans. That's kind of the path that you can go down if you're engaging in masturbation on a regular basis and then also fantasizing with it.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience. I used to watch quite a bit of porn,
Yeah.
and I remember one moment I can't remember exactly where I was. Maybe I was walking to the street or walking down the mall, and I caught myself looking at every woman and imagining her either naked or me sleeping with her,
Right.
or even just evaluating like, oh, would I have sex with her, or she's got, nice breasts, nice butt, but I don't like her lit, and like it all became objectified. I'm like, whoa! I caught myself in the moment. I'm like, I'm not even like I'm looking at these women purely as objects. It was a
Yeah.
wild experience, and I'm glad I recognized that in the moment.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit crazy. They actually did a study that illustrated this point really well, which is they had a bunch of male butterflies and then they created these cardboard cutouts of really bright colored female looking butterflies, quote unquote. And they had
Mm-hmm.
this little mechanism and their wings moved really quickly. And basically there was a high level of stimulation that came from these cardboard cutouts. So they put the male butterflies in a room with these cardboard cutouts, and obviously they tried to mate with them and they realized like they couldn't. Then they inserted female butterflies into the same room. And what they saw is that the male butterflies, even though there were actual female butterflies there, they preferred the cardboard cutouts. Those are still the ones that they tried to go after. And
Mm.
what they did, this was sort of in conjunction with some other research, but what it illustrated is that our brains get rewired. The part of our brain that even would recognize somebody as a person as opposed to an object is basically inactive when you watch pornographic content, when you watch people without clothes. And so all of this kind of conditioning and programming is taking place when we're watching porn regularly that we don't even realize. What you just mentioned is what I experienced as well. I hated the person I was becoming because it seemed like everything was sexual. I sexualized everybody I saw, and it was not a way to live. Especially when you want healthy relationships, you want to have healthy friendships with women. And for me, I was single at the time, wanting to get married one day. It's an awful way to live, and for me it was really there was a lot of guilt associated with it too.
Well, I also think there's an issue with having everything that you want all the time. Like with pornography, you could say, okay, well, I like women who are 5'5" with blonde hair, with a D cup, with this size waist, and you can pick exactly what you want. The problem with that is that's not real life. And it doesn't apply
No.
just to the way that we look physically, because the odds of you finding that custom woman in real life are really low, and she's probably not into the things that you're watching as well, and so you may discard an amazing relationship or amazing opportunity for intimacy because you don't have it just your way. It reminds me of what's that? Weird Science. Where the two
Yeah.
guys they make
Yeah.
this incredibly beautiful woman, and it's like you are ruined for the rest of your life now because there's nobody that can compare to the perfect woman that you want to create.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who I would say have fallen into this trap a little bit, and whether it's because of porn explicitly or not, I'm not so sure. But people are getting really picky, right? And
Right, that's what
and
I'm
almost
saying.
yeah, like picky to a fault, right? Where it's like exactly like they're turning down viable options, like some great women who they could have a very healthy relationship with long term because, of like stupid little things that really don't actually matter that much. And that's the thing, like you and I, like you've been married for I think it is what 18, 19 years.
18 years, yeah.
18 years, yeah. And all the marriages I look at that have, last the test of time, when you ask them like what really matters in another partner, they never talk about the physicality of it. Never. If they do, it's way further down the list. It's character, it's the ability to work through problems. It's the more vital parts of a relationship, and we're just being conditioned and programmed away from those things when you're watching porn. And like you said, you can build your own model, your own porn star, your own whatever it is that you want.
Well, I also take issue with the whole mentality of test driving. That's something that
Right.
or compatibility. And when they say that, what they're not talking about emotional, mental, intellectual, spiritual
Yeah.
compatibility. They're talking
No,
about
it's
sex.
sexual chemistry. Yeah,
Right.
100%.
And yeah, sure, but I think a lot of that sexual chemistry gets resolved in the compatibility of mental, emotional, spiritual compatibility.
Yeah.
the other things, of that stuff can be worked out, but it's so fascinating to me that that culture is just like everything is sexualized, and if it doesn't work just the way you want it, or she's not into X, Y, and Z, then you're just going to throw everything else away. And I'm not saying physical appearance isn't important. Of course it is. Of
Yes.
course it is. But there's other things that I think are a better litmus test of your so-called compatibility or chemistry than just how good she is in the sack or what weird act she'll do.
Yeah, I always kind of laugh when people talk about the test driving thing because, like, if you really run with that metaphor, it's like, yeah, you're going to test drive it now. And then what happens when they want to trade in the model for a newer
Mm,
one,
yeah.
right? What happens when the car breaks down? Like, what are you going to do? Like, it doesn't really make sense. And again, like, it depends on people's goals here, but presumably most of your listeners have a good head on their shoulders. They want to have long-term, committed, healthy relationships. And yeah, you have to pay attention to the more fundamental elements of it that's what's actually going to last. But then I do agree, like we shouldn't be negating the physical part of it either. Because yeah, that part has to be in the mix for sure.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about some of the issues, the way that you can tell if maybe you have a problem, some of these core deeper levels, but we really haven't got into solutions. And the reason I
Yeah.
wanted to hit that first was because I think if we understand the nature of it and our nature as men, that will have an easier time when it comes to implementing the solutions that you propose. So, but I do want to shift gears and talk about some things that we can do. And there's things that we heard of, like having an accountability partner, or track streak counting, like you were saying, which is, you're not an advocate of. It sounds like, um, putting filters and programs and apps on your computer that will send your 10 closest friends that you're looking at pornography right now, things like that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm really curious about what you would suggest as a tactical approach to overcoming this addiction that so many men deal with.
Yeah. So if you had a weed in your garden, you always have two options. Let's say it's not in your garden. Let's say it's in your lawn. You can run over it with the lawnmower, or you can put some gloves on and you can uproot it. And what a lot of guys try to do when they're trying to control some sexual misbehavior in their life is they settle for the quick surface level solutions. Slap an internet filter on. The logic of it makes sense. It's going to block you from doing the thing you're doing, but it's not actually getting to the roots. It's just running over that weed with a lawnmower.
And you're going to
To
have to keep
actually
doing it.
exactly, like temporarily it looks great. It's only a matter of time before it comes back. Whether it's the same plant or whether it grows another weed, either way, you still have a problem.
It requires
So
a lot of willpower. I'm just wondering how we get to the point of not having to will ourselves or against this temptation that we have.
yeah, so this was my experience, Ryan, is like I did all these things for like 3 years. I would consider myself a pretty disciplined, will-powered guy, and I did everything I could to white knuckle my way through it. Really hard for a brown Indian man to white knuckle his way through anything, by the way. But I gave it everything I had, and ultimately it just left me with more shame, more guilt, and basically feeling like there must be something wrong with me because I can't figure it out. To
Mm.
me, the thing that actually got me freedom was getting underneath the surface to the roots. And what I actually mean by that is trying to identify when I am tempted, trying to identify when I actually gave in, what else was going on beyond just the urge itself or the desire. And that takes a little bit of work. We kind of have like a little process of building self-awareness, transformation of the heart, and then establishing your identity. I mentioned that. That's kind of our process for like really actually identifying the root issues, working through them, and then the identity piece is actually installing the new like healthy root system, quote unquote. Um, that's kind of what it looks like at an overview, but maybe you can ask about any particular elements that you want me to double down on.
I mean, I like that framework. I'm just thinking about in my own personal life, the temptation comes for me when I'm bored.
Right.
So if I'm busy, uh, not that's a non-issue. If I'm
Yeah.
busy, clearly doing an interview, or doing something with work, or I'm engaged with my family, clearly that's not an issue. It's that old adage of idle hands are the devil's workshop type
Yes.
mentality. And for
Yes.
me, that's absolutely true. And so I've just got to be busy. I've just got to do something that engages me so I can get that out of the brain.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, I think that's kind of man's nature. Like, we are wired to act, to be active, and to do things. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I would say though, if you can't sit with yourself for a little bit without feeling the temptation and watching, you probably have some deeper root issues that you need to tackle. And what I would my first inclination for somebody who says that is pain. You probably have some pain that you need to process. Because I think when a guy is really healthy, he should be able to sit in those empty moments and actually feel content with himself. We shouldn't have to drift to those kinds of places. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is therapeutic for me. I want to hit on this for a minute. And if it's good for me, I know it's going to be good for a lot of other people. Um, Sitting in silence and being still is a challenge for me.
Yeah.
It's a serious challenge. One of the things that has actually been beneficial for me in practicing this is hunting, where I have to sit in a tree stand by myself in the cold, typically
Yeah.
for 3, 4 hours at a time, just sitting there. And I've been doing that for about 5 or 6 years now. This year, I just got done with a hunt about a week and a half ago. And this is the first year where I felt, man, that was actually pretty nice. All the other
Okay.
times I had to like push myself through it or constantly on my phone playing a video game while I'm sitting
Yeah.
there in the tree stand.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because there would be layers to something like that. I don't know if that's just male nature. Like I said, we love the activity and the busyness. There's definitely an element of conditioning that's just happening in our society. We are the most stimulated society of all time between our devices and technology, and we're just used to it. We're just used to the quick hits and all that. But I again, like I actually teach my guys this all the time. I'm like, one of the greatest superpowers that will separate you from regular men in society in the next 15 to 20 years will be twofold. One is your ability to focus, and the other is your ability to handle silence or handle stillness. Because without those things, I think we actually drive ourselves into the ground one way or the other. And for what we're talking about, to actually get to the roots and to be healthy in your inner life, you need those moments. You need that capacity to be still, to be silent, and to actually reflect a little bit within. And that's actually a tactical part of what we do. We teach people how to be reflective, how to spend that quiet time, because without it, you don't really get a chance to figure out what's actually going on within you.
I also think there's an issue with needing that attention or validation from other people because they're not always going to be around, right?
Yeah, true.
And and not only that, you become needy and annoying to put it nicely. And nobody that might be to your wife, that might be to a girlfriend. If you need her because you can't sit in stillness, she's gonna pick up on that. And it's like a new little pet. She gets a new pet, a new puppy, and she loves it. But the puppy starts to poop, and the puppy then she has to clean up after it, and then she's got to take it everywhere. And if she doesn't want to take it, she's got to find a sitter for it, and it becomes
Yeah.
really annoying really quickly.
Oh yeah, 100%. And again, I think this is actually the premise of it. Like, to me, porn addiction, or somebody's desire to watch porn and they can't stop, that's just a symptom. Like, the real problem is always underneath the surface, whether it's unmet needs or a lack of maturity or insecurity or those kinds of things. And I think sometimes we can medicate those issues in our lives by being busy, or by finding our sense of purpose or identity in a relationship or whatever it is. So I agree. Like, our goal here is, we're not just trying to quit porn. What we're actually trying to do is become men who are well-rounded, healthy, and self-sufficient to a degree. Like I said, faith is a component for me, so I don't fully buy into the self-sufficiency. There's a dependency on God that I have that really carries me through. But that ability to just be not so reliant and needy, that's everything to me. That is the mark of a true man.
Well, I like this approach better because you're going to hit a lot of ancillary vices as well. So
Exactly.
there might be drinking, there might be lying is one where people or gambling, and you're hitting all of these other vices by default because you're focusing on the root of the issue. So I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago called Become a Force Multiplier. And I think this is what you're talking about. You're not talking about putting a band-aid on the addiction of pornography. You're talking about getting to the root issue, which now multiplies your positive return. It's going to hit the pornography for sure, but it's going to
Yeah.
hit a lot of these other things as well.
Yeah, and on the other side of it, when you get free, because you have cleaned up the root issues, you're not just going to notice that you're not watching porn anymore or that you're more in control of your sexuality. I mean, we see people have radical transformations in their relationships. Sometimes it's career changes, spiritual awakenings. Like it starts to spread to all the other areas of their life as well, because the issues that are getting resolved are so fundamental.
Hmm. How does a man, because I know again there's a lot of guys who are going to listen to this and they're thinking to themselves, man, this all sounds great, this all sounds wonderful, like I know that I've got a problem I need to deal with. How does one start to become aware of, not that they have a pornography addiction, they already know that, but begin to identify what the root issue of their addiction actually is?
So there's two really easy ways to do this. If you don't have somebody in your world that is safe that you can talk to about it, then what we recommend people to start with is a journal. And all they have to do is ask two questions when they're journaling. What am I thinking and what am I feeling? Most guys can answer the first question. A very small percentage of guys, unless they're taught, can answer the second one. And there's, maybe we can put this in the show notes. There's, if you go to feelingswheel.com, it's a little device that gives you a nice kind of lexicon of terms that you can use to articulate how you're feeling. I still use this thing. I've been clean 7 years. Still helps me articulate kind of what's going on. Probably the easiest way to start just tapping into what's going on within you. And then if you do have somebody that you trust, that you can talk to, that's not going to be judgmental, that you know is just going to hear you out, then talk to them about it. Those are two of the quickest ways that you can start to like process and get an idea of what's going on. Sometimes the root is trauma and maybe it requires a bit more professional help. If it's like something like loneliness or even boredom, maybe not boredom, but the loneliness is becoming a big one. I'm sure you get tons of comments about that all the time, Ryan. And that's where like something like what you're doing, it's called the Iron Circle that you guys have, I think, right?
Iron
Um,
Council.
sorry, Iron Council. Those kinds of communities and stuff are amazing ways for your guys to plug in as well and get started on this. If they just want some camaraderie, some companionship, and maybe a little bit of help having more honest conversations.
Have you found that this, you talked about having a trusted person, would this be, or would you advise that this could be a spouse, or should it be another man, a brother, a friend, something like that, and not your spouse?
Yeah, so I would say typically not your spouse. Not to say that your spouse couldn't be in the mix, because I obviously don't support secrecy and keeping your spouse out in the dark. But I'm talking about somebody that you could talk to at a very detailed, granular level if you needed to, without any kind of fear of recourse or recoil. Sometimes our clients will ask us like, hey, I have an accountability set up, like a covenant eyes or something like that. Is it okay for my wife to be my accountability partner? And we pretty much always say no. Like, again, she should be in the mix, but you need somebody that you can actually be fully transparent with. That's not going to be your wife. So
Hmm.
find somebody else in that place, and then have some sort of arrangement with your wife for how often you share or how much you're going to open up to her. But it's a weight that she was not meant to bear. There should be somebody else in that role.
So that's good. I like the way you said that. A weight she's not meant to bear. It can come at the extreme, and I've seen myself do this, and I've seen other guys do it, where they won't share anything with their wives, and
Yeah.
I think I'd warn against that as well. Uh, okay, so I think you answered this question, but let's say somebody's got a pornography addiction, they're working on it, they want to work through it. Do they come clean to their wife? Do they talk about past pornography addictions? Do they leave it alone and work through a program or a course or some of these tactics? What's your suggestion there?
So you have to remember the goal. The goal is not to get free of pornography. The goal is to become a better man and to regain control of your life. And if you have a significant other in the mix, there is no way you're going to accomplish that without their knowledge of your situation. How they find out about it is up to you. And what I always say to people is if you're in a relationship, you're watching pornography, and you know it's a problem, you only have two options. You can confess or you can be caught. There's
Hmm.
no other way it ends. So the things that we fear of, where it's like, no, I couldn't tell her because if I tell her, she's going to be pissed at me. She might leave me. I might never see my kids again, et cetera, et cetera. The chances of those things happening when you confess are next to nothing. I can't promise they won't happen, but it's very, very small. If you get caught, then just about anything could happen. Those things suddenly become way more likely. So I do believe you have to let your significant other know, And we kind of walk our guys through a process of disclosure. There's initial disclosure where it's maybe bringing awareness to the issue, like, hey, this is a thing. Here's how long it's been going on. Here's the extent of it. It's not super detailed, but it's kind of an overview. And then a full disclosure where the significant other could get some more questions answered and that kind of thing. So it has to be part of it, but it could be rolled out in phases, so to speak.
That's it. That's an interesting thing. I'd never heard about that, but that makes sense because if you just come drop, a nuke on your wife like that, that's an issue for her. That's an issue for you. There's ramifications to that, and so you're easing into this conversation.
Yeah, guys especially need to do this because sometimes we forget we've had like the 20 years of this addiction and a little bit of time to process it. We've thought about how we're going to say it. And sometimes we forget that the person hearing the news is hearing it for the first time. So all the things that we think we're going to get into, it rarely happens that in that first conversation because it's just such a shock to the other person. It's a lot for them to take in. So there has to be some patience and just a bit of vision casting for this process that needs to unfold for your significant other to really understand your situation properly without them getting too damaged in the process.
That's interesting because there is some level of empathy that you should have for her and what she's going to experience because she's going to
Yeah.
feel rejected. She's going to feel maybe not as attractive. Like there's some things that she's going to have to work through as well as you come clean about this.
Yeah, there's a whole rising industry called betrayal trauma, and it sort of plays into this. That in fact they've done some research, and it shows that what people experience when they hear about this on the other side is similar to what people experience when they experience PTSD, just because it's such a shock. Now, that's not to discourage the guys from sharing it, but it is to say that like this is a pretty serious matter, and you want to make sure that you do it well when you share, so that she's as well positioned to not just absorb the information, but make sure that she can work through her stuff. Because typically, this kind of information is going to bring up some of her stuff as well that she may need to work through.
Yeah. Yeah. You now, okay. So whoops. I'm just looking through my notes. Going back to what you said about becoming aware, I think you said that there was two things that you focus on, and we got to journaling. So writing what you're thinking and what are you feeling. Was there something else that you were going to share in there?
Yeah, okay. So we divide journaling into two components. The first part is expression, and that's where you're asking those two questions. You're trying to label your emotions and define your thoughts. The second element is reflection. And this is exactly what we were talking about just a couple minutes ago, Ryan. It's where you put the pen down and you just start to listen. And so for me, this is where I hear God's voice. It's that still small voice that kind of speaks to me. Sometimes it's just words of encouragement. Sometimes it's connecting dots. Like maybe I'm really pissed about something. I'm trying to work through it and I get that clarity. But the idea is that you're setting aside time now to be more silent, more reflective, and to try to kind of piece things together and get some clarity on everything you've expressed. So that first part is more about just getting it out. And like we said, it should have two components of thoughts and emotion. And then the second element is more reflecting, where you're trying to get some sort of resolve or some sort of resolution that ultimately brings clarity to what's going on within you.
What is the significance of doing both thoughts and feelings? Why is that important?
If you do just one or the other, you don't have a good enough picture of what's really going on within you. And as much as guys would like to believe that we're predominantly thoughts or we're basically logical, those are the things that we tend to lead with, but they're not the only things that are going on. And for you to really, again, if you want to resolve root issues, especially if you want to get through like any kind of sexual misbehavior, trust me, there's a very real emotional component that's going on here. And if you're not making the effort, even just when you're doing something as simple as journaling, to get in touch with those emotions and at least understand what emotions are at play, you have no hope of any kind of long-term success for mastering your sexuality or anything else, because sex itself is very emotional. So that's why you need both elements in there. It gives you the best display of what's going on in your heart. And then that's going to lead to the best solution or the best resolve after you do that.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny how often we say that we're logical and we're not emotional or we shouldn't be emotional. I'm like, well, that's all sounds great in theory, but let me ask you guys, did you get pissed off today and react or respond inappropriately? And it might have been insignificant. Maybe you were frustrated with how work was going, and so you snapped at one of your kids. Well, guess what? That wasn't logical. That was an
Yeah.
emotional outburst, and all of us do it every single day.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we're way more emotional than we'd like to believe. That's where we spend a lot of time. Like that's why we have things like the feelings wheel and some of these other stuff, these other devices rather, because yeah, we just need help. Like this is how I got through my porn addiction. Like I had to teach myself these things and go to seminars and figure it out because I knew that I somehow needed to tap in, but I was so callous and so convinced that I didn't need to, that it cost me my relationships and it kept me stuck in my addiction. So yeah, it's a huge part of the recovery journey.
So you said something interesting. You said you were so calloused, you thought you could do it on your own. You don't need this, but it wasn't working. And I imagine you knew that. So
Yeah.
without trying to project on you, were you banging your head against the wall and thinking like the next time you bang your head on the wall, it would work? And that's not directed at you. I mean, we all do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the honest truth. The thing for me is I had this dressed in like a lot of spirituality. Like I was praying the right prayers and I was like, I'd read my Bible after I relapse and I did all the right things to kind of give me that illusion of like, I know what I'm doing and I can figure this out. But I actually had a mentor one time, and I was single when I was really really struggling, and I told him, oh, I can't wait until I'm married and I'm having sex. I abstained and didn't have sex until marriage, and so I was saying, I can't wait until I'm married and I'm having sex and I won't have to deal with porn again. And he almost reached over the table and like smacked me in the face, and he was like, bro, marriage is a magnifier. Like if it's a problem now, it's a bigger problem later. And
Mm.
that was the thing that kind of put me in my place and kind of lit a fire under my butt to actually do something about this. And I think that's what kind of got me out of this cycle of thinking I could do it on my own. It gave me just a little bit of an impetus of like, okay, I need to do something about it. But I mean, yeah, I was like every other guy, just pretty confident that I could do it on my own and really just way too scared to reach out and get help. And it kept me stuck way longer than it should have.
Did reaching out and getting help, you were talking about there seminars, things like this that you were going to, did that make you feel, how did that make you feel initially?
It was kind of debilitating, because you're sort of admitting you have this problem. Like as long as you're numbing or you keep the problem at bay, you kind of don't have to admit that it is what it is. But I hated that feeling of helplessness. Like I hated to admit that I did everything in my own power and I couldn't figure it out. That was like a huge pill to swallow. But after I did it, I mean, and again, this is why you talk to people that are actually loving, that you trust. That's a big part of this because I was met with so much compassion on the other side of it, so much acceptance. There was one friend in particular who was like, man, I've been struggling as well, which I kind of thought at the time I was the only one. And all of those things really helped me pretty quickly get over the pride, get over any of the fear, and realize, oh, this is actually way better because now I feel like I'm actually seen. I feel like people actually know me for who I am, and I'm still experiencing love and acceptance. That was incredibly transformative for me
Hmm.
in those early stages of recovery.
Is confession, would you say, is that part of the recovery process? Like, does that need to take place for you to go through this full recovery process?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, the degree is going to be different for everybody. Confessing it to yourself, that's usually where it starts.
Right.
For me, I was confessing it to God quite a bit, but that wasn't actually doing a lot. And it may for other people, but it was really the confession to people. That's where things start to change. There's a scripture that talks about, sharing your sins or sharing your mistakes to one another that you may be healed. And I think there's a lot of relevance for that here. It's not to say that if you confess, like you'll never struggle again and just in the snap of a fingers, you're good to go. But I think it is the gateway to getting some of that deeper help that you need in a way that's actually going to be receivable for you. Because I think people get scared of programs. They get scared of talking to a counselor. It feels like too much. And I totally get it because I felt that way too. I'm a huge advocate for that stuff now, obviously. But if you're even willing to just start by talking to somebody and confessing it, man, I give you props. Like that takes a lot of guts, and that's a great start on your recovery journey.
Yeah, I can see how that would be. Well, anytime I've ever shared any of my struggles, just from an emotional and like mental stand, like my soul, I think is the best way to describe it, becomes lighter. It's
Yeah.
that heavy burden is lifted. And I really liked what you said is that people love and accept you for who you are in spite of what you view as, your own inadequacies that nobody else is dealing with, when in all reality, everybody else is dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But you have to actually experience it. Like you can't just know it logically, or you can't just know the theory of it. There's nothing like being seen for who you really are and being accepted. And I think that's true at a spiritual level for me, like in my relationship with God, that has been life-changing. But to experience that human to human as well, it's incredibly powerful.
Tell me a little bit about your book, the Last Relapse. Tell me a little bit about that and how that might serve the guys that are listening.
So we've been helping people get free of porn addiction for about 4 years formally, and quite a bit longer before that. And we've had the privilege of helping, people around the world, and athletes and doctors and college students, everyone in between. And one of my mandates the last 2 years has been to try to get as much of our resources available to as many people as possible. No charge, no barrier to entry. So I mean, I spent a lot of money on writing a published book, and that's what The Last Relapse is. It is literally our blueprint for recovery. So from A to Z, everything we walk people through. Tons of practical stuff, comes with a free workbook. It's just chock full of all the stuff somebody would need to do our system and actually resolve the roots of their addiction. And we've made it available for free. We have a daily podcast as well. We do all kinds of content and get all kinds of stuff out there, with the intent for people to get these resources and start making a change in their life. So that's what the book is. It's just our blueprint for recovery, and it would be an awesome place, whether guys are just starting on the journey, or maybe they're serious and they want to get more help. The Last Relapse is a good place for that to happen.
Excellent. We'll make sure we sync that up. Where else can the guys go to either pick up a copy of the book or learn more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, so for your audience, I actually have the book. I have a PDF download available completely free of charge, at thelast.relapsebook.com. And I'll actually that's the standard link, but I'll give you a special one, Ryan, that we can put in the show notes.
Okay.
And then the other place that people can follow us, like I said, we do a daily podcast called Unleash the Man Within, and we post content on Instagram every day as well. It's Sathiya Sam. A little bit tricky to spell, but maybe if the link's in the show notes, people can follow us there. Porn and all the other sexual misbehaviors are a daily struggle, and so that's why we do so much daily content. We're just trying to be that positive voice that can encourage and hopefully inspire people to a life of freedom.
Excellent, man. I've taken so many notes here, and we'll sync everything up, guys, so you know where to go and you can get the links. But yeah, I've taken a lot of notes here, and I know this is going to serve a lot of us. So, Sathiya, I really appreciate you coming on, you sharing some of this wisdom with us, and hopefully it'll change some men's lives.
Yeah, it was a pleasure being here, Ryan. Thanks so much.
Thanks, brother.